Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Komansky, Vice President of the Ann Arbor League of Women Voters. Welcome to this town hall. I'm here representing the League of Women Voters of Michigan. We are a nonpartisan organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League does not support or oppose parties or candidates. You might be familiar with our efforts to educate voters through our nonpartisan voter guides and candidate forums. We do take positions on issues after studying them. We were formed in 1920 as an outgrowth of the suffragist movement. We're in all 50 states, and here in Michigan, we have 27 local leagues. Membership is open to anyone 16 and older. The League also works to increase understanding of major public policy issues through education. That's why we're here today. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening, League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor Area President, Joan Sampieri.
Thank you, Lynn. Welcome, everyone. As Lynn said, I'm Joan Sampieri, President of the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. I'm really pleased to be joined tonight by our partner in bringing this program to you, William V. Hampton, President of the Ann Arbor branch of the NAACP. William, would you say a few words, please?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? All right. Let me just start by saying that I appreciate my friend Joan. I appreciate the entire membership of the League of Women Voters, and I appreciate everybody who's participating right now. Not only do we appreciate the extraordinary work that we all do, we also are working to make this world a better place for everybody. I believe collaboration is better than competition, and it is our pleasure to be a collaborating partner with the League of Women Voters for this town hall. The history of suffrage in America for disadvantaged people is an eternal struggle. It goes without saying that the disadvantaged communities disproportionately include women and people who look like me. Every time we seem to make a few advances, something happens like 2016 to let us all know that the world still needs to be improved upon. For example, without exception, every president who's been elected without the majority of votes of the people who participated has caused some great havoc for this country. Therefore, if it fits the rules of the League of Women Voters, let me close by saying, in my judgment, one of our next major goals should be taking a good, hard, long look at the Electoral College. Because I am so excited about this town hall meeting, my goal is to be short, concise, direct, and to the point, so I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, William. Our topic this evening is the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission and Communities of Interest. Our panelists are Dr. John Chamberlin, a League member and Professor Emeritus of the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, UMLSA, who will talk with us about the importance of redistricting to representation in Congress and the state legislature. He'll be followed by Dr. Vicki Paulisson, EMU chemistry lecturer for 27 years and a member of the Michigan League of Women Voters Communities of Interest team. Vicki will lead us through the understanding of the role communities of interest play in designing fair maps and how you and your community can participate. Then we'll have some time for questions and answers. John, would you like to start?
There, I think I now have control of the slides, so let me get started. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This evening's presentation covers three related topics. First, redistricting and how gerrymandering undermines representative government. Second, what Michigan did to get rid of gerrymandering And third, the new system for drawing legislative district lines and how it works, with an emphasis on the vital role played by communities of interest in the process. Every 10 years following the national census, the lines from Michigan's congressional, state senate, and state house districts are reviewed and redrawn, taking into account population changes in the United States and within Michigan over the previous decade. Redistricting in Michigan this year is going to be very different. The citizens, through the Michigan MICRC, will be doing the drawing of the lines, and that's a big change. So how are the maps drawn? First, they're drawn according to state procedures. So the states have some choice in this. It's the process of drawing lines for congressional district and legislative districts. And how the district lines are drawn determines which voters reside in each congressional and legislative district. In Michigan, we currently have 14 US congressional districts, having lost one following the last census. We seem likely to lose another as a result of the 2020 census, but we won't know for sure until the census is published. Michigan has lost a congressional seat following every census since 1970. The number of seats in the Michigan legislature has not changed. The Senate has 38 districts and the House has 110 districts. Let's turn to seeing how district maps are drawn by the Michigan Citizens Redistricting Council according to specified rules and redistricting criteria, adopted according to specified rules, all of which are different than they were in 2011. The US Constitution requires that seats for the US House of Representatives be apportioned among the states according to the population counts provided by the census. Two federal statutes apply to all redistricting efforts. The first has to do with equal population. That the Supreme Court, in a decision in 1964, Reynolds versus Sims, determined that the general basis of apportionment should be one person, one vote. This rule means that generally electoral districts must be equal in population according to the most recent census. The Voting Rights Act is the other major thing, that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act prohibits district lines that deny minority voters an equal opportunity to participate in the political process and to elect representatives of their choice. There we go. So what's the problem that we're trying to solve? The problem is that political parties and elected officials, when they control redistricting, frequently use this power to manipulate district lines in ways that affect electoral outcomes. Such actions are called gerrymandering. That is, the lines are drawn to give the party in charge an electoral advantage, to protect the party's incumbents, and to create challenges for the minority party. Here's an example of how gerrymandering works. The figure on the left shows a hypothetical geographical area, first without district lines, and then 3 maps that divide the district into 5 districts. The overall population of this area is 40% purple voters and 60% green voters. There are a couple of ways to assess a map that creates 5 districts. One is compactness. There we are, but we're back. The first is compactness. A twisting, weird shape of non-compact districts often signal a gerrymander. A second is partisan balance. The simplest way to do this is to compare a party's percentage of the total vote for, say, the state house with the percentage of seats the party wins. The left-hand map shows the area before districts are drawn. The map next to it shows districts that are regularly shaped with lines drawn vertically, and the outcome matches the party distribution of voters, 3 green victories and 2 purple victories. The next map has districts that are also they're compact or defined by horizontal lines. They're regularly shaped, but seem obviously unfair because the outcome is that green wins every district, shutting out the 40% of voters who are purple. The last map on the right shows districts that are neither compact nor arguably fair. Note the irregular shape of the districts and the purple voters who are 40% of the electorate win a majority of the districts. something keeps getting in the way of my being able to click to the next slide. Here we are. This comes from an article in the Washington Post, drawing the lines to suit special interests. And it shows two of the major gerrymandering techniques. Cracking on the left happens when a community, in this case, the purple voters, are split among districts, thereby diluting their voting power. And packing, the other one, the right-hand figure, shows, again, a community, again, of purple voters, are all put into a single district, which they get 100% of the vote in, but they don't have significant political power in the rest of them. Both of the strategies have been common in gerrymanders, affecting voters of color and communities in which voters of one party are concentrated. Since the passage of the Voting Rights Act, cracking and packing of communities of color has declined but not disappeared. But usage of these techniques continues in partisan gerrymandering. The next four slides show the districts that resulted from the 2011 round of redistricting. Michigan's population then was about 9.9 million. Each of the 14 congressional districts had about 700,000 people. Each of the 38 Senate districts had approximately 260,000, and each of the 110 state house districts had approximately 90,000. The populations of the new districts will be similar, with the congressional district population increasing if Michigan ends up losing a congressional district. Even though many of the districts in these maps are reasonably compact and don't look particularly odd, the congressional map in particular has been regarded by many observers as a partisan gerrymander. And much of the gerrymandering occurs in the Detroit and Southeast Michigan area, which is very hard to see here. But here's an example. This is Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence's district, the 14th. In 2020, she won re-election with 80% of the vote. So the district was reasonably packed with Democrats. 58% of the district population is African-American. Given its twisted shape and the variety of communities within it, it is not a district that is likely to provide fair and effective representation to citizens. And it also presents a significant challenge for Congressman Lawrence to be in touch and responsive to all of the communities in her district. This is a state Senate districts. And again, many of them look, they're groups of counties. There's a little bit of area around Battle Creek. And again, Southeast Michigan and Detroit have districts that are very hard to see at this point. That again, it's very hard to see the districts here. There are more of them that are oddly shaped that stretch across township and county boundaries. If you'd like to see what your district looks like, you can go onto the internet and find pictures, and you can see ways in which these districts might have been gerrymandered as well as the congressional districts. So now we have a new way of doing this. In November of 2018, 61% of Michigan voters voted to end gerrymandering by approving Proposal 2, which amended the Michigan Constitution. The amendment shifted the power to draw district lines from the legislature and the governor to an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, which goes by MICRC, if you can master the acronym. It also sets standards to ensure a transparent, impartial, and fair process, and uses established clear standards for drawing district lines. The composition of the commission prevents domination by one political party. Note the balance. There are 4 members who affiliate with the Democratic Party, 4 that affiliate with the Republican Party, and 5 who are either independent or just affiliated with minor parties or don't affiliate with any party. And there are a series of redistricting criteria that they meet in doing their work, and we'll go on to that. All of the commission's discussions, deliberations, and decisions must be transparent. All the meetings are live streamed, archived, and available on YouTube. First, I'll describe the structure of the commission, and then who's eligible to serve and how they were selected, and then we'll move on to what they do once they're seated. The commission size is 13, so a majority will be required to make decisions, and there's an odd number, so there won't be a tie unless someone abstains. There are 2 requirements for being eligible to serve on the commission. A citizen must be eligible and registered to vote in Michigan and must submit an application, and that application includes an indication of the applicant's political party affiliation, whether Republican Party, Democratic Party, or affiliated with neither of the two major parties. There is also a detailed list of conditions that disqualify a citizen from serving on the commission, a list intended to protect the process from being compromised by forces that accompanied gerrymandering in the past. The list of disqualifying characteristics include having been in the last 6 years a declared candidate for a partisan office at any level, an elected official for a partisan office at any level, an officer of a state, national, or local political party, a paid consultant or employee of such a candidate or elected officials, an employee of the legislature, a registered lobbyist, and finally, a parent, step-parent, child, stepchild, or spouse of any of these. The goal in selecting commissioners is to have the commission's membership reflect the state's geographic and demographic makeup. Individual citizens were invited to apply using the Secretary of State's website. In addition, the Secretary of State mailed applications to 10,000 randomly selected qualified voters who could apply by using the website. By June 1st, the deadline 2020, over 9,000 Michigan citizens had applied to serve on the commission. So the level of interest in this was quite high. After June 1st, a random process weighted to reflect the geographic and demographic makeup of the state reduced the pool to 200 applicants, 60 self-identified Democrats, 60 self-identified Republicans, and 80 self-identified unaffiliated citizens, half of each group being drawn from the 10,000 citizens who received an invitation to apply from the Secretary of State. Then the top two party leaders in the House and the Senate were each allowed to strike 5 applicants, reducing the pool to 180. Then a final random selection produced the 13 commissioners, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 5 unaffiliated. The selection process went exactly as planned. Since the commissioners were selected, 2 withdrew for personal reasons, and their replacements were selected using the same random process. And the commission has been meeting regularly since September. Their job in the end is to approve a map for the congressional districts, a map for the Senate districts, and a map for the House districts. They will spend a lot of time holding public hearings, consulting with experts, relying on specialized software and data from many sources, including the Census. The idea is to develop district maps for Congress, the state Senate, and the state House that meet the redistricting criteria in the constitutional amendment and are approved according to a process specified in the amendment. So let's start with how they will vote. You can see that before they vote, plans will be proposed for their consideration, and they will be tested to ensure that they comply with the criteria. And then a final plan may be adopted with a majority vote, which must include at least 2 commissioners from each major party, plus 2 commissioners who affiliate with neither. So there'll need to be at least 7, and there will need to be at least 2 from each of those groups. If no plan receives this majority support, the process moves to a second and, if necessary, a third stage before selecting a districting plan. Due to the pandemic, data from the 2020 census will not be available to the states until September 30th. So final development and adoption of maps will take place after that. The amendment requires that final districting plans be adopted by November 1st. The amendment also requires that once districting plans are proposed for adoption and have been submitted by the commissioners, there are at least 45 days for the public to comment upon them, including at least 5 public hearings. The delay in releasing the census data makes this schedule impossible to achieve, and the commission has requested that the Michigan Supreme Court extend the final map approval date. And we have not heard from them about that request. Okay, so let's turn to the criteria and the rules that govern the day-to-day, working on maps and developing them and evaluating. These are in the Constitution. and they must be used in creating and adopting districting plans. The point is to provide citizens with fair and effective districts and to decrease the possibility of gerrymandering. There are 7 criteria that must be followed in order of priority that in developing and adopting new districting plans. And I'll read with a bit more detail of these. First, the districts must be of equal population and comply with the US Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. Second, districts must be geographically contiguous. Third, districts shall reflect the state's diverse population and communities of interest. Communities of interest may include, but shall not be limited to, populations that share cultural or historical characteristics or economic interests. We'll turn our attention to this criterion in a moment. Fourth, districts may not give a disproportionate advantage to any political party. This shall be determined using accepted measures of partisan fairness. Fifth, districts shall not favor or disfavor an incumbent or candidate. Sixth, districts shall reflect consideration of county, city, and township boundaries. And last, districts shall be reasonably compact. That's a long and complicated list. And again, they're to be taken up in order of priority. The next phase of the commission's work is about to begin, and that involves hearing from members of the public what their views are about the next set of districts for Congress, the state Senate, and the state House. Relying on public testimony and redistricting is another way to stop gerrymandering. The amendment ensures that transparency and public participation replace the secretive closed-door meetings that used to produce districts in the past. There must be public hearings before and after maps are drawn and proposed for adoption. There must be at least 10 public hearings before anything is adopted and 5 public hearings after plans have been proposed. So that those meetings are being planned right now, and I think the schedule is out. It will start in May. The hearings will be accessible via online, and members of the public will be the principal participants. The commission has been developing a plan for these meetings, and you can find it on their website. The public may submit testimony about their stakes in redistricting, districting plans, and other materials for the commission's consideration. This will be part of the public record and will be available to commissioners as they develop new districting plans. Once the commissioners have formally proposed districting plans, the commission will publish these plans with accompanying data and allow at least 45 days for public comment. To ensure transparency, the commissioner, staff, attorneys, consultants may not discuss redistricting matters with the public outside of a public hearing. After final districting plans are adopted at the very end of the process, the commission must publicize the 3 plans and provide a report explaining its decisions and the materials used to assess the plans. The League of Women Voters is monitoring the commission's meeting to be sure that the law is followed. It has and will address the commission, and it will meet with the commission staff. We will focus for the rest of tonight's presentation on the redistricting criterion that concerns communities of interest. It ranks very high in the list of redistricting criteria, just after meeting federal law and having contiguous districts. It's a relatively new concept, certainly to Michigan. So we have a new concept high on the list in a brand new process. Public education is extremely important if we're going to get the public participation in this phase. And the League of Women Voters will be active in helping communities of interest it will identify them, connect with them, support their participation in redistricting as they prepare testimony or maps to inform the commission about their views and new district lines. We'll now turn to Vicki Paulisson to lead us through a discussion of the role communities of interest play in Michigan's new redistricting process.
So, good evening to everyone. And thanks, John, for bringing us up to this point. Hopefully now you all have a good sense of why and how the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission was formed. And we're going to refer to that as the MICRC. We now want to focus on how you as a citizen can participate in this process. And that is primarily through being a member of a community of interest. So you need to understand what a community of interest is and why they matter. These are the conduits for residents to approach the commission and to make a statement about how they wish district lines to be drawn. The communities of interest will have a profound impact on the drawing of maps. And remember, they are third out of 7 priorities, okay? Third on that list. Now, we can look to the Michigan Constitution for a description of what is included in the community of interest, and it states that a community of interest may include, but shall not be limited to, populations that share cultural characteristics and/or historical characteristics and/or economic interest. Now, that's really rather vague and open-ended, but notice what's missing. What's missing from what can identify a community of interest are shared relationships with political parties, incumbents, or political candidates. The goal here is to create fair and effective representation of the people within the community of interest by focusing on the bonds that make them a community. The communities of interest are going to be the basic building blocks of the legislative districts. Now, the MICRC is in a unique and some would say enviable position. Their duty is to create a new process of redistricting. They're going to create a template that's going to be used in Michigan for decades to come. Because remember, redistricting must occur at least every 10 years following the census. Now, while the MICRC cannot look to other states to define communities of interest for them, they realize there is no need to completely reinvent the wheel. And so they have looked to other states who have used this as a criterion for them. And in 2010, California was the first state to form a Citizens Redistricting Commission. So the MICRC has listened to representatives from California for a sense of how their commission recognized communities of interest. The MICRC has also looked to other sources for input, including a study done by the Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy, commonly called CLOSUP, and that's at the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. So the commission is in an ongoing process of developing their concept of communities of interest, because that is a key component of this brand new process they're developing. Now you see here an example, a list of examples of communities of interest, all based on sharing cultural, historic, or economic interest. Now notice that a community of interest would represent a population with shared interests, and so as such, maybe rather homogeneous. But it's the collection of the communities of interest that will represent the diversity of the state of Michigan. So I have a few specific examples for you. Some of you may be aware of the sizable population of Hispanics and Blacks who live in Southwest Detroit, in what's been termed the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan and possibly the entire United States. The people who live in zip code 48217 live in a contiguous landmass. They also share that with 3 dozen pollution-spewing facilities, including a Marathon oil refinery. And people living in that area have suffered from poor air quality for decades. Now, the people of 48217 might wish to identify themselves as a community of interest to the commission so that their voices can be amplified when it comes time to elect officials familiar with their unique interests and needs. And notice that the community of interest must self-identify. Then they must approach the commissioners, let them know they exist and where they exist on a map. They need to let the commissioners know what their common bonds are. They might also want to add what are the community of interest they'd like to be aligned with or separated from. Now, the population of the people in zip code 48217 might not be large enough for a single district. But the goal is to keep the community of interest intact in whatever district they're placed, so their voices are amplified. We can move to a second example here. One of the meetings I attended, there was a representative from the Battle Creek area. Now, Battle Creek is presently in the 3rd Congressional District with Grand Rapids. They plan to approach the MICRC and claim that they are a community of interest. They have shared socioeconomic concerns, and they share a concern in the east-west I-94 corridor. The people in Battle Creek feel that they have very little in common with the folks in Grand Rapids. When they look for new recreational activities, or they want to go shopping, or new dining experiences, they go west on 94 to Kalamazoo. They're going to approach the commission and ask to be considered a community interest by themselves and joined with the community of interest in the Kalamazoo area because they have more in common with those folks. We can look to another large population near a natural resource. We think about those people in the Midland Saginaw area that were affected by the flooding of the failure of the dam in the Tobacco River. Those people live in a contiguous landmass. They are all going to be affected by legislation targeting the rebuilding of the dam system there. They might want to identify themselves as a community of interest, so they will have a voice when it comes to legislators and legislation involved in the repair and the rebuilding of that area. Now, bottom of the list of examples is neighborhood associations. You might think that's thinking it too small of a term, but not true. Where I live in Dexter, down the road, is a neighborhood that has 600 acres within it and 400 homes. It straddles the Webster Township and Scioto Township lines, and now is split across that lines between the 7th and the 12th Congressional districts. The people in that area share a contiguous land mass. They could identify themselves as a community of interest. They have shared socioeconomic status. They have shared use of 2 small lakes and a river that goes through their neighborhood. And they have their own sanitation authority. They might consider approaching the commission to be labeled as a community of interest and asked to be kept intact, the whole neighborhood kept intact within whatever districts they're placed. Remember, the community of interest comes higher on the list of priorities. It's 3rd, right? Higher on the list of priorities than consideration of county, city, and township boundaries. Now, we can look to that close-up study that I mentioned, close-up group. They suggest that the key qualities of a community of interest are first, that the population has shared common bonds. Secondly, they are associated with a contiguous landmass. They're basically neighbors to each other. Third, the common bonds associated with the community of interest, those bonds that hold them together, have to be linked to a set of public policy issues that they may reasonably expect to be affected by legislation. So think back to the 4 examples I gave. The people in zip code 47217 have a real interest in air quality. That is a legislative, that is affected by legislation. The people in Battle Creek, Kalamazoo area, they have an interest in the I-94 interstate highway there. The people in the Midland Saginaw area have an interest in dam building and flood prevention. That is affected by legislation. And people in the neighborhood I mentioned, they have a concern about water quality. They have 2 lakes, a river, and a sanitation service. By keeping the communities of interest intact within their legislative districts, those members have a more effective representation than if they were split across 2 or more districts. Now, the communities of interest matter because they are meant to be the building blocks for legislative districts. The goal here is to draw fair and effective districts so that voices are amplified, and that gives everyone a voice. Remember back to John's description of cracking, where the spreading of voters among several election districts weakened the voices? And remember his example of fair and compact districts, where the districts were built to keep voters with similar needs intact? Fair and compact districts provide a way for voters to elect lawmakers who are familiar and concerned with their needs. Now, at this point, you might be wondering how you can get involved. There are a number of ways. Public hearings have been set up by the MICRC. You can find them all listed at their website here in the middle. You can sign up to attend one of those meetings and make a presentation, represent your community of interest. You can also contact them through their portal that will soon be set up and send in written materials explaining your community of interest and how you think lines should be drawn. There's also a nice document here, it's a PDF file the MICRC has put together that kind of summarizes all this for you. You can find that on their website. And lastly, we want you to know that the League of Women Voters is here to help you. We have people trained to help you in writing testaments and helping present oral testimony. You can contact your local league to be put in touch with someone who can help you put these things together. And you can find all of the local leagues on the League of Women Voters of Michigan.org here at the bottom. So I want to thank you for your time and patience this evening. I'm going to turn things over to Joan for our question and answer period.
Thank you, Vicki. William, I believe you have the first set of questions.
Okay, great. Please let me start by saying thank you to both Vicki and John for sharing this wonderful information with the rest of us. We appreciate that. John, district lines are extremely interesting. You talked about how those map lines were drawn, which I found extremely interesting. So I think it was slide 10. You talked about Congressperson Lawrence's district. So in your opinion, how does the way those lines are drawn in her district affect the fair representation which you spoke of earlier?
Well, I think that is a very complex district. I mean, it includes city of Pontiac by the time it winds up there to the northern end. It includes Grosse Pointe, it includes downriver areas in Detroit. These are communities that don't frequently interact with one another. My guess is if you ask them what were their top issues, that they're quite different if you're in Pontiac or Grosse Pointe. And yet they're all in the same district. It's a very democratic district. It was probably drawn that way. It was drawn that way because Brenda Lawrence is an African-American and there was a sensitivity to that. But while they were drawing it, they seemed to put a lot of Democrats in there, a lot more than she needed to get reelected. And that presumably helped out districts where the Republican Party was looking for a better chance to take a district. I also think it's not a district that if I were, in Brenda Lawrence's shoes, I would find it easy to represent. There's so many different issues that they have. It's so hard to, go to every part of that district at least once a month and meet with people. So I think it's clearly a district that was done not to help, it was done to help Brenda Lawrence get reelected because some Democrat from that area was going to be reelected. But it was probably, its intent is better seen in what happens around that district. Who are they moving in or out? City of Farmington gets special treatment in that. There must have been a reason for that. So I think that we don't know why they did it because none of us were in the room where they were doing it, and they didn't have to justify the map away under the new system. Not only will they have to produce maps that we can see them at work, but they'll have to tell us what's the rationale for the map. The rationale before was we had the power to do it and we did it.
Okay. I have a couple more questions for you, John, my friend. We've been reading a lot lately about how prisoners are counted in the census. If they're counted in the actual prison system, and if they're counted where they're located at physically in the prison system, how does that affect the representation of the communities that they lived in?
It certainly affects the representation of both of those communities, that the prison location builds population in that district who can't vote, and the hometowns of the people who are in the prisons don't get counted, don't count those people. So prison gerrymandering is an issue that's come to the fore, and a number of states are doing things about it, but it certainly tends to cost some representation and voting power for the homes of these people. And it also boosts the representation of places that have prisons. And often those are, lower population areas who will probably resist losing that population because it helps them get more representation. It's certainly legal at this point, but it's being challenged in Michigan and elsewhere.
Okay, thank you so much, John. I heard you say earlier that you didn't know what the people in the room were thinking, and we understand that. But one of the reasons why we all look to you for advice and counsel is because of your excellent assessment skill sets. So these last two questions have to do with your opinion. How do you think the delay in the census data needed to construct the maps will impact the 2022 election?
I think there are two influences on the redistricting process that we didn't count on. One was the pandemic, and partly because of that, a delayed census. And they both present real challenges, certainly to the schedule of getting things done. And there are people who are concerned that if it takes until January to get the plans approved rather than November 1st, it will delay candidates getting organized and knowing what their district actually is as opposed to what they hope it will be. And it will compact the legislative district races in 2022. I'm sure that candidates and people who think they might be a candidate are affected by that. Whether it has a long-term implications for that, I don't know. I think it's likely that the districts that come out of the current process will look different than the others. So incumbents will be worried about what does their new district look like, and challengers will be hoping they get a district that they might have a shot at challenging an incumbent. There's a lot of nervousness there. There's not much we can do about it at this point. The pandemic has certainly caused it to be difficult for people to get together. They'll rely more on media, social media. And sometime in a year and a half, some political scientists will probably be able to tell you what happened. But right now, they can only tell you what might happen.
Okay, speaking of what might happen, I have one additional question right now. And that is, from your perspective, in your judgment, will the districts after the next census in 2030 is taken be drawn in the same manner as they are right now?
I think the basic shape of the process is likely to stay the same, partly because it's in the Constitution. So if you wanted to change the fundamental part of it, you'd have to amend the Constitution to take care of that. You contrast that with California, where their system is in fact done through legislative process. So if some things don't work so well, you can go back and repair them. There's a lot that's discretionary in figuring out what are the details of the process that the amendment sets up. And my guess is we'll find some things that we think could be done differently. Hopefully we won't have a pandemic. Hopefully we won't have a census that's delayed. We can go back to thinking about what did we imagine this process looked like before the world collapsed. But I think the basic shape will be the same. I think it's a sound structure. We'll certainly learn some things. I'm sure there will be some legal cases and some things may, get explained by the judiciary. But I think this is probably here to stay. One of the reasons it's here to stay is it is in the Constitution. If you don't like it, you still have to amend it away. And so it won't be something the legislature can do on its own.
Okay, thank you so much, John, my friend. My friend Joan.
Thanks, William. Vicki, I have a couple questions for you. You did a really good job of explaining what a community of interest looks like and what it might be. So I have a question about where I am. Would my community, which is largely rural, be able to suggest maps? We have no public transportation, no readily accessible broadband, and many of us live in what are considered food deserts, where they are more than 10 miles from the nearest supermarket or grocery store. Is that what you're thinking of in terms of a community of interest?
Sure, it could be, sure. So, the way to think about that is, where's the geographical region that this encompasses? Perhaps that's all in one township, or maybe that goes over 2 townships. You could talk to your township supervisor and get the word out to the community and say that, we're interested in presenting ourselves this way, and choose someone to represent that group. So the best way to do that is, if you're thinking you're a member of a community, you need to reach out to the community members. You need to define where your community is. And then most easily would be to find a group that's already representing that community, like a township leader or a city leader. Or let's say you're in a neighborhood, your neighborhood association should be able to make contact with the people in the community. So your area sounds prime to me as a community of interest. You have many things that are pulling you together, and those things can be affected by legislation.
That's very helpful.
A couple of other types of communities that are spread out like that. Many counties don't have a community college. That really limits what someone who graduates from high school can do. They need to go away, or they can drive maybe an hour each way to and from going to school. They could form and try to start new community colleges. There's also a lot of counties that lack a major medical center, lack an obstetrics department, for instance. They have a common interest in trying to bring to their communities things that those of us who live, in Washtenaw County or the populated areas have.
That's really interesting, because when we think about how legislation occurs now, it doesn't usually trickle up from the bottom. It usually, unless it's an organized organization that represents people. So you're saying that we have an opportunity to represent ourselves in drawing the maps and then finding legislators and legislation that would work best for who and where we are in that community of interest. So if my community then comes together as part of a community of interest, how can the League help support our participation? Many of us haven't testified at a hearing before. Can you help us prepare? And if so, how do we get in touch? You showed a slide, but is there a way for us to let people who are on this know further how to get back in touch?
Well, the last slide did have the League of Women Voters of Michigan website, and that's pretty easy to remember. It's lwvmi.org, okay? You can just Google League of Women Voters in Michigan and you'll end up there. And then from there, you would want to find your local group. So if you're in Washtenaw County, you're going to want to contact the League of Women Voters in Ann Arbor. And we have a system set up to shuttle you to someone who will assign someone to work with you. And we have some templates for people to work with to put together their testimony. We have some materials to work with on how to put together an effective presentation. And so the League of Women Voters have this material. We're very happy to share it with people, with groups, and to work right directly with them.
Thank you. William, there's a question in the Q&A box. Can you see that?
There's one
Looks like
question
it's Dr.
as of this
John.
moment in the Q&A, came in at 7:45. I think they mean hearing and not heading, but the question is, the public hearing requirements seem on their face to be a good thing, but it requires that the public be able to critically analyze the map. What kinds of things should people be looking at in preparation for the hearings?
Well, there will be groups that might put forth a map for the entire state. And there will be groups that will present to the public hearings their own little piece, their community of interest. So it's up to the commissioners to take all that information and sort it out. But if a community of interest doesn't approach the commissioners, they're not going to know that they exist. Okay. There is no list of communities of interest in the state that they rely on. They have to make their voices known to the commissioners. And the commissioners have set up already 16 public hearings throughout the state. You can find the dates and the locations of all those on their website. And they have also setting up a lot of informative meetings, like they have one tomorrow night in alignment with Close-Up. So the commissioners really have the whole responsibility, but the citizens have the responsibility to give them information and let them know how they want their district to be drawn.
I think you're muted, John.
Yeah. One of the things that a community of interest can do is to locate themselves on a map. And you can do this with a map from the AAA, but there are some very good and not terribly complicated mapping software you can get on the internet. If you have a computer, you could get into that. If you can click a mouse, you can sort of identify your neighborhood by clicking the places that are in it, in your community of interest. You can also plot that against your current congressional district or your state house district or your state senate district. And you can look around to see, so who's in the next district over? Would I rather be in a district with them? So the mapping software, if you're familiar with using computers, is pretty easy. If you're not, the league can probably help. My guess is a librarian at your local library could help. And being able to see on paper or on a screen in this case, what the district looks like and think about, how do I feel about my current districts and what direction would I like my new districts to go in, can be a very helpful thing. And it would be helpful to the commissioners to hear that kind of information from you.
Right, and the commissioners are using a mapping software.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to put information into the program and click and choose areas. So the more information they get, the better it is for them.
I guess my bigger concern would be that subset of the population who lack access to transportation and may not be able to avail themselves to a computer. So how does a person like that find out about these public hearings?
Well, you could call the local league and ask them what's nearby. And there are ways other than showing up at a hearing and talking. You can send materials in. You could probably record a video of people talking about it and send it in. It's not just showing up at a meeting. And quite frankly, at this point, we don't know what the pandemic conditions are going to be next month. Things may have to be more virtual than we would like. But there will be people who know how to do things like this. And they are eager to help because they understand that if your community of interest doesn't make itself known to the commission, it's going to be like you didn't exist. And they're particularly interested in district in communities of interest that aren't used to participating in politics, that don't go to Lansing, go to hearings, things like that. So I think there are plenty of nonprofit organizations interested in turning out communities of interest and helping them figure out how you make good use of the time you get in front of the commission.
Right, and I agree with William. You know, the concern is that those people who are unrepresented in other ways will not be represented here either. And so that's why groups like the League of Women Voters and Voters Not Politicians and other groups have had mass mailings to inform people. You know, we kind of targeted groups that we think might be communities of interest or know of communities of interest, and spread the word that way so they can reach out. And like John said, it doesn't have to be showing up at a meeting. They are trying to have these meetings in person, which is part of the reason why they keep changing the venues. But things in writing can also be submitted. You can use a plain old mail and send it in.
This is really important, isn't it? It gives us more of a voice in our representation, even before we get to the ballot box. This is pretty significant. So we have another question in the Q&A box. To have a lower quality as it will be so rushed, what would assist the process to decrease the concern?
Well, my sense is the census data are going to come out and we're going to have to live with the census data. It probably is not as complete and accurate a census as we would have had without the pandemic, without other things having to do with implementing the census, but it is the gold standard for redistricting. We're going to have to use those data. And I think that the fact that they arrive late, the amount of time, you know, legislatures in other states and the commission here have to actually get this done. There's going to be pressure to get it done in a hurry. These things are incredibly difficult to do and very intricate. And my guess is that this won't be one where people felt like, oh yeah, we had time to do everything and check everything twice. They're going to feel it was a hurry and we had to do the best we could. And I think they will, and certainly in this state.
Actually, I did hear someone on the commission mention, you know, the delay in the census is kind of helpful to them because they are collecting their data now, May and June, July. So they're getting all their information ahead of time. Then when they get that last piece from the census, they'll plug it in. So in a way, they're given a little bit more time to get this done. And an important thing to know is that they're being very transparent about everything. So you can go to their website and see the upcoming scheduled meetings and sign up to go to one of them or just watch them like I have done. And you can also look at their website there for all the past meetings. They're all recorded. Everything is transparent. They're making a huge effort for that. So that does lessen some people's concerns, I think, you know, about the whole process being done in a fair way.
John, do you want me to read the next question?
I say a couple more.
What do we got next?
You do.
You want me to read them?
Sure.
All right. In addition to the criteria that has already been identified, is there a requirement that the community itself express a desire to be viewed as a COI through a joint statement or a government resolution?
If you're a community of interest, it will be up to you to show up or send stuff in. There is no directory of community of interest. You can go to your public library and check out, and they can go down and contact. Communities of interest are new and they're defined by the people who are in them. That I think that means that, you know, it's important that people take part in that. I think that it doesn't have to be a formal resolution. You know, governmental bodies, counties, cities, townships could pass a resolution and send it on. Their concerns rank lower in the list of priorities than communities of interest. Now, maybe collections of them are a community of interest, but there might be a community of interest, as Vicki mentioned, that crosses county boundaries or township boundaries. That community of interest wants to be treated separately and in state impact, they better testify, because otherwise it won't look like they're dividing up a community of interest. They can run the district line down the county boundary or the township boundary. And so particularly areas that have grown up, I mean, those boundaries for counties and townships were constructed a long time ago. And sometimes cities have grown across boundaries and metropolitan areas have grown up. And I think that those are important and that people need to take them into account. But if you're a community of interest, you're going to have to register it yourself.
Okay. There's two more questions in the Q&As. John, you want me to read them? You want to read them, John?
Now go ahead and you read them.
Why don't you take
Okay.
the next one?
All right, to all panelists, how successful do you think redistricting will be? I just left my screen. I am in a very jigsaw puzzly piece of district number 7, and I am very discouraged by our situation. So I guess the question is, how successful do you think redistricting will be?
I think if you look at the past meeting, these 13 people have put a lot of time and effort into being transparent and educating themselves. They've asked a lot of questions, even what you might think of as a small question. They've asked a lot of questions about this, and I think that they're really taken to heart to do this properly. And, you know, the 7th list in that list of priorities is compact districts. That's to eliminate these jigsaw-shaped districts like District 14 that you saw. So, I mean, you know, I think the process so far is lending me to be hopeful about it being successful.
I think it will certainly be more successful than the process we used to have, which resulted in 2 gerrymanders in recent decades. And I think California's experience and some other states that use commissions of one kind or another have also been satisfied that the citizens have felt that was fairer than it used to be. Now, you're not going to make all of the people happy all of the time here, but at least all of the people have a chance to chime in. And you get to observe them making decisions as opposed to reading about it in the paper the day after it happens.
Okay, this is the last question that I see. It came in 3 minutes ago. What is the address for the MICRC? The website.
Should I just share the last slide here with that on there so people can write that down? Maybe that would work best. Let me do that. Can people see that slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the websites are right there. And I think I heard someone say they would post it also for you. And so, you know, if you just type in redistricting in Michigan, you're going to come up with that first website. And the bottom one is for the League of Women Voters of Michigan. And from there, you can go to all the local websites for the leagues.
Those
That's
are all the questions. I'm sorry, William.
I was just going to say that's the last question in Q&As, but
So if there's nothing more, we'll turn it back to Lynn.
Okay, I want to thank our panel again this evening, Dr. John Chamberlin, Dr. Vicki Paulisson. I also want to thank Joan Sampieri, our League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area president, and William B. Hampton, president of the Ann Arbor branch of the NAACP, for moderating tonight's town hall. It was an excellent discussion. I also want to thank our League Zoom tech team for their assistance in managing tonight's webinar. This evening's webinar has been recorded and will be posted on our website, lwvannarbor.org. It will also be on our League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area YouTube channel. And there will be a link posted on our website where you can go to follow the MICRC Commission along with dates for all their meetings and public hearings for the Commission. So I want to thank you again for attending on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the NAACP, and wish everyone a good night.